while everybody is getting ready for the closing panel, I will already start with saying again how beautiful it is to be in a room with all of you. And the beauty of it is also that now after 2 days and a lot of hours in these 2 days where we listen to so many incredible thinkers, educators that gave us so much food for thoughts. It's now fantastic being here with the three of you. And after really hands-on portion also this afternoon, that meant a lot to us as well. For the protection of all beings has been quite a long way till we put it together. And I mean, we are so grateful from the Goethe Institute. And by the way, I am Bettina Wodianka from the Goethe Institute, but you will know me by now, I guess. We are very grateful for that and for that so fruitful, enriching partnership with City Lights, especially with you, Peter. So we cannot thank you more for that. And after those 2 days, I have to say, there are a lot of feelings too. I'm worried, I'm hopeful, I'm having so much to digest. And this won't be just the next few days, but there is quite some time to digest all of that and to discuss, and not just digest, but to discuss it further. And now having you in the space, I wanted to say, this is also nice because you recognize the people you met online over these 2 days, and then coming together for the last sessions. So first, I want to really just, for everybody who hasn't been here for our workshops, and just let me get my notes, just a very brief introduction of our workshop leaders from today in the afternoon. Jonathon Keats in the very middle is known as Poet of Ideas by the New Yorker, and a multimedia philosopher prophet by The Atlantic. I can't just leave that out because I know the title. An artist, writer, and experimental philosopher, the unique ability to blend art, philosophy, and technology into conceptually driven interdisciplinary projects stands really out for me, and makes these conversations also so like bringing so many perspectives in on that. Pin Brunton at the very left, from your perspective, hopefully, now that I'm not dead, I'm sometimes challenged by that, but you will not recognize it, is a professor at UC Davis with appointments in science and technology studies and cinema and digital media. He's the author of Spam, A Shadow History of the Internet, and Digital Clash, The Unknown History of the Anarchists. Anarchists, thank you so much. This stays quite challenging with the pronunciation. Technologists and utopians who created cryptocurrency, and the co-author, and we heard about that today in the workshop, of the book Obfuscation, a User's Guide for Privacy and Protest, besides others. And now I'm really, really, really also very thrilled to have our last but not least, our third panelist here with us, Nina Dewi Toft Djanegara, and I hope I really pronounced it right. And Nina has dedicated her career to exploring the dynamic relationship between technology and society. She's a PhD candidate at the Department of Anthropology at Stanford University, and a visiting fellow in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the MIT. She was formerly the Associate Director of Technology and Racial Equity Initiative at Stanford Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity, I hope, where she oversaw programming, research, and strategic development on technology and racial justice. Her own research examines the use of facial recognition to govern US borders and interrogates the social cultural significance of the face as a symbol. In particular, she draws upon an ethnographic and archival methods to understand how facial recognition technology makes claims about identity, citizenship, and belonging. And I'm thrilled that you're here with us. And I would love to have this talk starting off with you and introducing us a little more in depth with your research and how it came also to the research.
Okay, sure. Do I need to be close to this, or I think it's a small enough room that I can speak. So I'm an anthropologist of science and technology, which means that I use anthropological methods and tools to understand how politics and cultural values are embedded in technology. So that's probably a pretty self-evident conclusion to this audience, but there are still many people who believe these spaces are absolutely neutral or ideologically objective. So that's kind of the starting point. I'm particularly interested in computer vision and facial recognition. And so the questions that come along with this are things like, how have we taught computers to understand categories of human difference? How have we taught them to see identity? And I, in my research, look specifically at how facial recognition has been used in US border enforcement. I fundamentally think of facial recognition as a bordering technology. So even if it's something as simple as unlocking your iPhone, that's still making, it's governing access, right? It's deciding who is able to be allowed in or barring others from entry. And so in the research, I look at how different points more empirically in the technology's history have been linked to national security and border control and US empire. I also think that, so Bettina has asked us all to think about historical aspects. And so for some of you, especially if you've left SFO in the past 3-4 years, you might have encountered facial recognition. We have it now called biometric exit and leave the country. If you are a member of these kind of trusted traveler programs, you might be able to use facial recognition to either pass through the TSA screening or through Customs and Border Patrol when you enter. So some of you might think that this is like a fairly obvious extension of showing your face in your passport. But I think in my own research, I try to historicize even that moment of having your face in your passport is actually also a historical product. It's a relatively recent one. And it took almost 100 years after photography was invented for the facial photos to get attached to the passport. So this wasn't like a kind of obvious extension of the technology. In fact, earlier passports only used bodily descriptions. They describe things like birthmarks and scars instead of the face. So this way that the face has become synonymous with human identity is a historical product. And then all along the way, when you think about how to identify people, there's been contestation, there's been debate. And if we want to think about how we can potentially change the use of technology in our society, we can also return to those moments. So to think about none of this technological progress is inevitable. It's all product, human invention and human struggle.
Well, the question that came earlier today because of that, and sorry, I have to move a little more to the microphone because my voice is so exhausted at that moment. When I listen to what you just said, I'm wondering also because we had that point so often in these two days when it comes to questions, was the problem there? The problem is not something new. It's something that has been there already before. And if we just solve it with the technology, it's not solved in general in a way. Is there something about that when I also think about the face as a symbol that resonates there on a level that hasn't been discussed so far, more broadly also in society?
About the face,
Yeah.
symbol, kind of largely. I think that for me, I'm just really interested in faces. And so once you start thinking about them, you start to see them everywhere. So the way that it's become a metonym for identity is kind of my interest in the facial recognition part. Some people talk about face-to-face as the site for ethics. So, you know, by looking at someone, that's how we can build ethical relations with them. But you also just see faces like they're in money. Humans kind of have an ability to like pick out faces in pattern recognition. So we think that they mean all sorts of things, but all of these are culturally contingent too. So ideas about sincerity and emotion, truth and authenticity, and how we express those through our faces are not necessarily all the same. And I think that kind of cultural component of the face is an interest of mine. Face is sometimes a metaphor for like your social prestige or standing. We talk about losing face, saving face.
There's so much to say about losing face, etc., and what that entails. Also, when I have a background as a theater scientist, and when you talk about expressions, I had to think of all the studies that have been made through that, like kind of trying to find certain images for certain expressions, and then finding out, okay, you can't just translate it from one culture to the others, but reading the face is so coded in that way. Just fascinating. Thank you so much. When it comes to now, and before I come now to what I really love to talk about to all of you when it comes to positive actions. And I mean, the obfuscation had some aspects of that, I think, but and also Jonathan's workshop, but what would be interesting from my perspective is also to learn from all of you how actually your research question evolved in a way, a little with the context of that. So, who wants to go first?
I should have just quite a lot. So.
Should I point somebody out?
Which of the myriad research questions can we take our pick?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. The most like let's connect it to what you feel in that very moment when you also think about that conference was the one that came up again or had some urgency, some absolutely urgency coming in.
Like maybe speak a little bit about how I have, without realizing it perhaps, been asking questions about protection of all beings for a long time, and how when we started to look at how to organize this weekend and started to look at this journal as a kind of a locus for conversation, how it really, I think, was very helpful in terms of putting together various strands of research, various interests of mine. I have for quite some time been trying to figure out, as so many others have, what to make of this mess of this society that we live in, specifically trying to figure out how democratic decision-making processes can potentially be more true to those who are involved in them, more inclusive and more reflective, more responsive, and to have the capacity to build greater responsibility so that it becomes a sort of reciprocal relationship between the decision-making process and the enrichment of the decision maker in terms of a sense of responsibility for the decisions being made. And I started this exploration thinking about it in terms of operationally ways in which democracy in the US was failing and ways in which to reconstruct the system, leading to this idea of creating a future democracies laboratory, a space in which publics could come together and could rapidly prototype other ways in which you could structure the decision-making process, starting with the building blocks of the system that we currently have, but allowing for myriad permutations. And as I explored this more, I came to think about the inputs as much as the structural basis for those inputs to bring about decisions that would be for the betterment of all of us, and realize that those inputs needed therefore to be reconsidered quite radically. And so much of the work that I've been doing more recently has been looking at how a more than human system of collective self-governance might manifest. What would it mean, not for us to protect all beings, but for all of us beings to be in it together in a process of self-realization? So what might be signals or signifiers that could work within a system that would be accessible to all beings and meaningful in terms of their well-being? How does that get aggregated in a way that then is through a system that is more inclusive, capable of providing for all of those constituents, all life on Earth, to provide the means for all life to thrive? And so to me, there is one dimension of this, which is biomimetic, but not in the sense of making more Velcro to make more landfill. Instead, biomimetic at a deep level of trying to figure out how self-governance predates us as humans by, well, I would argue that stromatolites had it down better than we do. And that goes back to the Precambrian. So how we can learn from other beings in terms of homeostasis, self-governance, well-being, and then also how we can reimagine the interactions that take place that can lead to a richer and more effective way in which the world can make sense of itself, and can, in the process, reintegrate us into the world as participants with others, as opposed to observers of others, as opposed to antagonists of other ways of being. Instead, to recognize this sort of collective act of self-governance as one that is all-inclusive.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. When you were describing that, and kind of also the moment of the again, that I feel, and now when I connect that back to the workshops today, and especially obfuscation, I was wondering, being active again, which was so interesting when we sat at the tables, actually. Being active and thinking actively about these questions make a difference than perhaps reenacting with it. Because then I had to go back to that moment with Ramesh yesterday, when he kind of kicked off his talk with, oh yeah, then I'm on a platform watching something, about to watch something, but I don't know what. And I felt like, oh yeah, so I'm not the only person who is like, oh, is it about catching up in a way? And I can't catch up. But do you feel that, and perhaps this has been a question for you, and do you feel that activation in a way then also creates momentum for something else?
Yeah, I mean, I was still digesting what had just been said by both panelists. It's very, so I'm going to arrive at your question, but I think in a way I would also like to try to stitch together what I've been thinking about over the course of the last 2 days with what's just been said here. So I had a little bit of a messy Zoom talk yesterday. I don't know how many people were there, where I was just like, I'm trying to resolve something about large language models. And one of the things that I find most compelling about them is often what people find most upsetting about them, which is the fact that they are often actually really good. Like, you can spot their flaws, right? You can identify mistakes from time to time. There's certain failure states, but even if you're just experiencing at the level of the party trick of saying, I want to read erotic fiction between Kirk and Spock, but written in the style of Thomas Bernhard or something, like, it'll deliver, right? It can only go so far. It can only pull it off within its limited scope. But the extent to which it is actually successful is, I find, fascinating. And I'm especially interested in how threatening it feels. The reason why I bring this up is that I think we can look back at a lot of the history of modern computing as being the history of people trying to get computers to do the things that made people feel smart, right? So, like, smart people play chess, right? So we want computers to play chess. Smart people do math, so we want computers to do math, and so on. And then this kind of like wonderful, depressing, shocking experience for computer scientists of periodically being like, well, it can now do the really smart thing. And nothing else has happened. We've gotten it to this point. I think of this wonderful book by Terry Winograd called Understanding Computers and Cognition, which he wrote in the early 1980s as an artificial intelligence scientist himself, in which he basically realized, I succeeded in creating machines that are really, really good at engaging in these very bounded conversations, but that doesn't translate into anything else. It doesn't generalize the way that a human generalizes about things, the way a baby generalizes. He had succeeded in making the system where you could tell it to put the blue block on the red block, and it would. And then later on, you could do several other things and then ask it, why is the blue block on the red block? And it will say, because you told me to put it there. Everyone's like, oh God, it's thinking, that cannot be generalized outside of it. So I say all of this to say that for me, one thing that has really come up in this over these 2 days has been my awareness of what I see as the colossal human blind spot, right? Of the extent to which we are looking to the parts of AI that we find impressive because they confer certain kinds of elite status within our society. What we are not looking at is, or what we are only now beginning to understand, is like the richness of the human face, right? And the extent to which our ability to read an expression, right? Or, as someone who lectures a lot, like the fact that I can look at a room of 120 people and still manage to pick up the people who are getting bored, little micro expressions, shifts in posture, like the ways that shifts in eye line, et cetera, like that is unbelievably rich. The extent to which we are able to collaborate together and the extent to which we are able to form these extraordinary super social structures that can both take the form of formal rules and constitutions, but can also take the form of like seeing someone with a flat tire on the side of the road and knowing how to interact with them and knowing how to help them. And the two of you can spontaneously work together as strangers. I don't just say this to valorize like the wonderful things about being human, but just to say that I am struck all over again by the extent to which our fixation on our technologies is not just about what the technologies are good at, it's our narcissistic fixations with the things that we prize in ourselves as being special and salient and significant and signs of intelligence. And that those are often, we are beginning to learn, some of the easiest things for computers to do, right? Like the things that we identify as simple are actually things that are enormously complex and difficult. And like I said at the end of my talk on yesterday, part of my hope for what we're witnessing right now, especially in AI, is the beginning of a thrilling dehumanization, a devalorization of the things that we think of as being our special humanness, so that we can actually appreciate the parts of being alive that are unique and particular to us, and that are really worth celebrating and embracing and remarking as being part of what make us alive in such a special, significant way in the world. Anyway, it didn't actually get to action. Yeah, I haven't thought about action, but I'll wait until more people spoke. Yeah.
You want directly?
To respond to that?
No, to go further. I think responding to, what comes up with that is immediately for me, the value of us reconnecting, also the value of community, the value of me, also asking what tools actually do we need? What do they solve before they are just thrown at us and make us need them in a way. So what we can kind of also co-design with the community that resonates completely when it comes to also all the inspiration drawn from and now what the three of you saying, what your research is connected to, what the talks throughout the conference has been connected to kind of perhaps also ask questions again instead of and as I said also that, or how you said that, being ready to collaborate, that makes it so interesting as well. But now going back to my question that the two of you now answered, I would love for you to respond to that as well.
About the evolution.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a lot of things that are kind of up here, so I'll try to tackle all of them. I think my research program has been broadly concerned with identity. What that means has evolved over time. I think that originally the way I conceived of identity as an interesting problem was observing that we have, on one hand, a kind of surveillance network that really tries to pin people down, identify them, and fix them in place, and wants to know exactly who you are. And then the rise of what is sometimes pejoratively called identity politics, but a lot of people finding meaning and expression and self-defining for themselves. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. There's these two things happening all under the umbrella of identity. They seem kind of the same, kind of different. And I was interested in how, I think my original hypothesis was maybe that surveillance was creating a kind of flattening identity. So social scientists, we think of identity as malleable, it's relational, it's developing over the life course, and how you identify might be very much interacting with who you're speaking to. So I thought, well, surveillance is taking all of that messy, mushy identity stuff and trying to really fix everyone in place and flatten these multiple identities into one. I think that as my research has evolved, now what I see is that instead of bureaucratic systems or surveillance systems flattening identity, I actually think that they're creating a multiplicity of identities. They're also creating more identities. So how I look to the state is different than how I think to myself. So I am a sneaky German citizen, actually, but my name is completely different. So I'm Nina Horstmann in Germany. I'm Nina Toft in the States. So we have multiple identities, I guess, and surveillance is actually producing those instead of platforms. That's the where the research is. But all that Jonathon and Finn have been thinking about, and also in relation to the way that you have framed this panel about thinking of positive solution. I have something I can say to that.
Oh, definitely. And this was the next step before I also wanted to say, get you prepared for participating here as well. But I would love to absolutely come to the positive action.
Okay. So this was a difficult question for me when Bettina originally posed it, because I'm the kind of academic that's very good at critique and not as good at coming up with generative solutions. And that's because it's a lot harder to do. But I think about, especially in relation to some of the other ideas that have been put on the table about collaboration. For me, what is an exciting path forward are kind of decentralized, distributed modes of creating technology. I'm thinking of shared mesh networks that were put up by activists in Berlin to give internet access to, especially this is like 2016, 2017, after there are many more refugees. Things like now, Tamika Bruce started this distributed AI research network. So when I think about all of my critiques, a lot of them have to do with the consolidation of power. And so what I think is exciting is the ways that technology is being created and developed through more collaborative and grassroots networks, including hopefully by some people here.
That's fantastic, and that's fascinating, because what you just brought in was so broad, but also so like really also so tied into these very actions all of us can make happen, but also we kind of have to organize for that to make that happen. So that brings me back what Ethan just said with the collaboration, which is on a smaller as well as on a bigger level. And I feel what we have seen here in the past, when it comes to that, organizing ourselves and what is possible here, also with or without obfuscation, is absolutely fascinating, and brings me to the question then. Okay, with the urgency and what makes that happen then, if we organize ourselves. But Jonathon, positive actions, and I know there is a lot for you to say about that as well.
So your question's about what is positive that I'm observing, or what positive actions we could be taking, or
Totally. Let's when we try to move forward in a direction, we want to kind of sketch out or have sketched out, or really moving forward in a thoughtful way, kind of what we want the future to look like, then what we can do about that.
well, at the Brunton Institute, where I'm currently a fellow, we're working on a multi-species constitution. No idea what that means at this stage. Nobody involved in this is so arrogant as to believe that they know what this might become. But I think that, to me, intuitively, a starting point for doing this work is, as I alluded to earlier, to recognize that governance is ubiquitous and that it predates us in myriad ways that can be incredibly powerful as models that we have the opportunity to participate in again, because we participated in them at the outset. It's only in really recent time, I would argue, that we have alienated ourselves from them. We've denatured ourselves. And so I think that positive action that can be taken right now, I'm really interested in trying to figure out, what is the common law of nature? By common law, I mean probably something that would be more appropriately called customary law in technical terms. So basically, what do we find that we already agreed to, that we now habitually ignore, or that we intentionally try to breach, that if only we were to do the work of trying to figure out what that fundamental agreement is, that is life on Earth, that is what makes and what sustains life on Earth, that can be a really powerful beginning, and not one without a degree of skepticism and criticism and self-criticism. I mean, we definitely want to be very wary of social Darwinism in various ways in which this sort of thinking or thinking that is parallel to it, perhaps, I hope not, but could be construed as such, has gone terribly wrong. So it is to be aware of all that, but at the same time to recognize that we live in a world that is so full of ideas that are so well established and well proven to work across such a vast amount of time in so many climate conditions and with such resilience that it's a world of opportunity. It isn't easy. It isn't that I am necessarily claiming that utopia is nigh, but it does seem to me that positive action is immediately accessible to us, all of us, and we all really need to be taking this by going out into the world and being amongst others, other humans and non-human species, and integrating that into our worldview.
Incredible, Jonathan. Thank you so much. There's also so much in there that, like, going back to the very, like, what is there, and then really retaking it from there, is such a, I feel has such a momentum and such a, like you say, opportunity, taking it as an opportunity and then like a burden. Thank you. Finn.
It's really hard to follow. I should have positioned myself elsewhere on the panel. To come last in this, but also I think I will maybe take present a slightly different approach to this in terms of action, positive action, because I've been really sincerely wrestling with this question since it was first presented to me. Because I started by like making one of those lists, you know, where it's like, oh yeah, of course, decentralized networks, public transit, you know, it's like, yeah, low water irrigation, promulgate permaculture, blah, blah, blah. And you end up with like this long list of things that are all good things. They're all worth fighting for, every single one. But if I were to like speak sincerely and from the heart, I think a profound form of positive action that might not immediately come to mind is to think about how to save things, and salvage things for after what is coming next. I personally, I believe very much in, you know, taking whatever sort of positive courses of action are available to us now. Some of the things we've already discussed and many more. Everything from direct democracy to open source hardware, these are all positives. If I am being sincere, I think we are extremely fucked. And our fuckness is going to play out over the next several decades in ways that are difficult to model and even predict. I think future generations, centuries and centuries from now, will look back on us with, we'll look back on the period that we are in, that we've been in for a while, and we will continue to be in, with a sense of trying to grapple with the magnitude of the tragedy that we witnessed and that we were a part of. I say this as like someone with a child. I think all the time about the world that my son is going to be an adult in. And one of the ways that I prevent myself from total despair is to recognize that we have lived through, and we are continuing to live through, this incalculable loss of biodiversity, of linguistic diversity, human culture. It's an absolute unmitigated catastrophe, but it's also not the end. And one of the best things that anyone in the future can get from the past is the things that the people in the past saved, things that they made a point of saving to pass on to the future, to make sure they didn't get lost, right? So my working assumption is that the cities will flood, right? The libraries will burn, either in forest fires, or they will be burned by their own deranged, like internet-pilled citizens, right? The super weeds will come, the weather will change for the worse, over and over and over again. So with that in mind, it is imperative to back everything, to save all the knowledge that you can, to store it in as many different places as you can. So I want to conclude now that I've brought the whole room down, which I apologize, but it comes from a more sincere place than just being like, you know what, everyone, buses, trains, they're good. Is to say that I encourage everyone to look into seed libraries, to look into groups. There's a lot of different kinds of groups that are trying to interview and gather the skills, the human skills of the past that are being wiped out by industrialization, handicrafts, production techniques, art techniques, to record all of the songs and stories, and poems that people have created over the course of our whole history, to try to save as many of the languages as possible, and to back up all the shadow libraries that we can, right? To like all those enormous collections of documents and books that people have been making on, you know, secret-ish servers all over the place, right? Like back those up, share them with other people. Like it's like they say at the Internet Archive, lots of copies keep stuff safe. So lots of copies of seeds, lots of copies of stories, lots of copies of every document you can. I encourage us to think of ourselves, all of us, by our nature as people living at this point in history, as archivists for future generations, as the people who will try to collect the cuttings from the trees and collect the DNA from the animals that are going to go extinct, and collect as much of the information as we can to pass on to the future when they're finally ready to take advantage of it. Sorry, that's.
Thank you so much. I mean, this was not a naive positive of actions, but like, thank you for adding that. I mean, there is, I think this is so important, and what you made me think about again is, and then I turn it over to you to include all of you, because we have been here together, was when we are having that, the initiative Sea Change we are working together on with Gray Area. And when we at the Goethe Institute with Gray Area together decided we are doing an open call really internationally, asking people to hand in their concepts for positive actions, prototyping something out, what came back was incredible for me, because we had like around 150 visions from all over the world, which the quality was really high end, with interdisciplinary teams. And exactly what I was saying, this is like the preservation and how do we go about it? How do we save languages? How do we bring also, when it comes to indigenous communities, for example, the younger generation on board with it, how to make it attractive for them, was really incredible, touching for me. And the whole team was absolutely impressed and stunned by that. And that was making me think, what is out there are a lot of visions, actually. I just think that we have to make them happen in one way or the other. So no, for that, thank you so much. Is there anything, is there already a question out there you want to ask? Yeah, please, should I?
My life has been an effort to seek an adventurous future. And I've had a lot of trouble recently with the handwriting. Everything's falling apart. My first exposure to a little faculty was offering me some answers in the United States this year. Thank you.
Happy to be of service.
Thank you.
Anyone salvage the vibes?
If I may, oh yeah, please.
So maybe a question more for Bettina. So, but identity implies sort of a single self, right? Or, and you mentioned that there could be multiple aspects, you have two identities, at least, right? But also we're gonna start to be able to clone our identity, right? So you'll have models trained, like with the token being your predicted actions and so forth, right? So you can, not now, but you can create another version of yourself that you could choose to be a little bit different than yourself. So how do you think about like identity with the potential for like fragmenting of self? By means of like your thoughts rather than your genes, your ways of reality.
I mean, I certainly, I think that we actually do the same, which I don't think that identity is like a single coherent self. And of course, there might be different ways in the future to have a conversation with a past self. But I feel like I've been experiencing it today because I used to live a couple blocks from here. I've flown into Boston, and I feel like revisiting this city has, brought back a conversation with this fragmented self. Right? So yeah, I think that for me, my core belief about identity is that there isn't a single one. And I think there's some comments earlier along these same lines. I don't think that we ever cohere. And so that would be troublesome if we really wanted to capture like this singularity of what a person is. But it could be interesting actually if we say that we're going to train a model on Nina 2023, and I can talk to her a couple years from now and hopefully be not too disgusting.
In the spirit of the conversation last night, and one of the themes that's been going throughout this conference, that is quantum. I think that it's incredibly powerful to take quantum systems metaphorically, perhaps, or maybe literally, but in either case as ways in which to be able to suggest other ways in which to perceive ourselves. And to me, Hugh Everett, with his many worlds interpretation, that is to say that when a quantum measurement is made, all possible solutions obtain, but each one of them in a separate universe within multiverse. That to me is an incredibly powerful idea that allows for a multiplicity of singular identities, that each identity can retain its internal coherence, and yet there's a possibility for all those identities to coexist, and all possible futures to somehow subsist in a way that luckily I don't get into an argument with myself all too often, because the multiverse is, at least as far as we understand, none of these universes can interact with each other.
I don't have anything to add to those two. I think those 2 points are perfect in themselves. Yeah. I do love the idea of unbottling like vintage 1998 model me and kind of see what that's like. Yeah. It's like that twisted psychology.
He did.
Yeah, I mean, as a curator, I'll have to come clean with all of you that the reason that I, come together with Goethe or whoever is because there's a riddle that needs to be answered. And I think what I discovered, it began with quantum, but then it became broader. And then I realized that was perfect, because I wasn't sure if that was, what I really wanted. But then I realized in the end, it all worked out, because I came to the conclusion that this is now creating a bridge for the next step, which is essentially for me, how I ask better questions. Just that simple.
That's so beautiful. When I listened, for example, Ramesh's talk yesterday, I had this all the time. When I was like thinking, oh my goodness, I just have to relearn to ask questions, actually, and not like telling myself and everybody else, or trying to keep up with that. Oh yeah, I already know. I completely know what you mean, or something like that. And also when it comes to technology and what AI, quantum, etc., but we also had a lot in these conversations where, well, who can tell what that exactly means then, or what is important here? And then I think now about the talk Wendy Wong gave today about data literacy and how important that is. And then I thought, yeah, like the education and being like honest perhaps to ourselves that we don't have to, well, we can like what does it mean actually to know something, or what is important here to know? It's interesting. Yeah.
There is something like really, it's been sort of taken old fashioned. I guess I just want to say that I really appreciate the positive, and then I also want to bring a negative into the room about, you know, the part of what we're up against is incredible concentrated, right? And you know, your work on the border and stuff like that, and I just feel like sometimes when I'm in spaces where people talk about sort of, you know, future studies kind of stuff, I often feel like there's and of course what the EU is doing is important, right? You know, but we need to talk about that. In other words, the organizing to take down the forces which are causing the terrible destruction of the beings that we all.
I still think about the Jonathan, what you said, the multi-species constitution, and in a way that the title of the symposium for the protection of all beings is beautiful, but we yet have to come to actually include all beings, right? And with that constitution, and yesterday you were talking a little bit about your research and how you try to get there with other species, but in my head, what I cannot yet understand is how will we be able to actually talk with other species, not about or of them, if we always, as human beings, we will always read any expression from another species from the way we are socialized and the way we read, and we cannot leave us. We cannot step aside. And if you read the behavior of an animal or a plant like this, it's because you think that, because that's how you grew up, or you learned at some point this means that, but maybe it doesn't mean that. Maybe it's another species, so maybe they have a completely different set of, you know, meaning and behavior. So I'm not able to arrive to the point yet. Hopefully in the future we will be. How can we reach that level of living with each other equally and not, you know, assuming something about the other species and thinking, oh, I think they like it like this, I think they mean this. Like, how do we ever get there?
I mean, I think these are essential points, and our tendency to anthropocentrize, to anthropomorphize, and to anthro everything everywhere
Yeah.
is toxic and something we really need to be take care about. But I would say that I'm certainly interpreting what you're saying in a way that is not exactly what you're saying, and vice versa. I would say that this happens all the time at every level of interaction, and that it also happens amongst species that is not humans to all other species, but each species to every other species. And that maybe, again, the model is out there in the world. Maybe the model is to say that if we can, for a moment, imagine a time before we took it upon ourselves to be in charge, that we would find that every species is miscommunicating with every other species. Nobody's understanding what anyone else is saying, because everybody is putting their own experience into the actions of others. That there are ways in which, as long as a power dynamic is so lopsided that it allows for certain beings or certain species to act in ways that are effectively overriding the ability of other species to be present and to be a part of that conversation, I think that there is then an enormous amount of creativity and an enormous amount of generativity, if that's a word. It's late in the evening, so it will become a word that comes in that. And to me, poetry is so rich for the fact of its ambiguity, not for the fact of its clarity. The fact that we have this ability to enter into a space with others that is a space of uncertainty is, I think, incredibly rich, rewarding, and incredibly valuable. And when we think about resilience as a phenomenon in the world, it's an overused term, but I'll use it anyway just to use it once more, that it is, I think, to some extent it has to do with this. It has to do with with noise in the system and noise in a positive, productive way. So we can just admit to ourselves that that our understanding is imperfect and that others' understanding of us is imperfect, then we can start to come up with systems that can make the most of that rather than systems that either attempt to deny it or that try to override.
If I could tie on to that actually, in a way that I think might also tie my co-panelists' research together again a little bit. You remind me of there's this wonderful scientist named Jerry Lettvin, who specialized in studying animal behavior, but who also was kind of somewhat like a fixer that other scientists would bring in when they thought they had a successful experiment, and then Jerry would like look at what they've done. So there was this group of animal behaviorists who said, we think we have taught pigeons to recognize human faces. And they had all of these files and they had this whole system, right, where like the pigeons were rewarded for punching a button in response to the presence of a particular individual in a photograph. We had these sets of photographs. They gave the photographs to Jerry. Jerry went into a room and like smoked 60 cigarettes and looked at the photographs and looked at the data. And then he came out and said, have you noticed how many red objects are in your photographs? And then they did the statistics again, and they realized that as humans, they were looking at the human faces in the pictures, and they assumed that's what the pigeons were seeing too. And what the data really to is that the pigeons are being rewarded for spotting particular objects in the images, particular colors. And I see that because I want to build on what Jonathon said. I think it's really worthwhile for us to lean into that, right? Like that. I mean, I can believe that it's true that Wittgenstein was right with that famous remark, if a lion could talk, we would not understand what they were saying. But the beauty of it, with everything that Wittgenstein says, right, it always cuts both ways, everything is always double-edged, is that that's not a statement on the limited world of the lion. That's a statement on the limited world of the human that is not able to like comprehend the meaning of what the lion says. But nonetheless, we are able to form these like rough and ready relationships. You know, whether you're like gardening or like interacting with any kind of animal, including non-domesticated animals, right? Like we are able to kind of form these interesting connections with them. And I do think there's something to the idea of that part of embracing non-humanity involves recognizing the extent to which those gaps will never be bridged. We can't engage in the kinds of communications that we would engage with each other. But there might kind of really be the space where we could all cohabit. I don't know if that's sort of
and collaborate.
Yes, yeah.
To come back to the
Yeah.
It would be really boring if we didn't have those spaces.
Yes.
If we actually understood each other, it would be really
Yes. Good Lord. Yeah.
Oh, yes, please.
That's more of a comment. This is something you were saying. This idea of AI, this notion that it might support us in valorizing some of the aspects that we don't consider, that sort of fall outside of the scope of what we're typically doing. I mean, I think what we're all talking about. It's just this notion, in fact, that language, in fact, is a form of a very privileged form of intelligence. One sort of epistemological way of thinking and knowing that we're really privileged within our society, even sitting here having a language. AI is built on that fundamentally. I think what it doesn't do is embody it and actually have all these other sort of ontological ways of being understanding reality. And so much of I think what we're talking, I think what you're talking about is so kind of unconventional, but we perceive or how do we engage with other things and how do we other knowledge and relationships. I actually can, because I think we probably overemphasize certain aspects of our way of knowing. I think if those become de-emphasized, and I think maybe as AI gets to the point where it sort of collapses that privilege, that idea of reality, we'll probably fall into other capacities, other latent capacities, allow us to actually speak and relate to other things in totally, probably ways like you're saying, maybe 1,000 years ago, different cultures that maybe can continue to engage in psychedelics or other things you already are aware of, like abilities that are within us, and probably is going to come back and build a system that's eating itself and eating our own world. That's kind of how I feel. So the one last point that I thought was really interesting is this Constitution. Actually, there's an artist in Matthew Djanegara at NYU where he's come up with the Declaration of Interdependence, but it really talks about this sort of like living organism cooperation that kind of is able to transcend human other things.
You mean Natalie German?
Yeah.
Yeah, I find her work very impressive.
All right. I think since we can stay together in that space, can pour ourselves another drink, for example, and just bear with us a little more. And then, but before we do that, I want to thank Nina for being here. Jonathan, thank you so much. And Finn, it's been a delight. I think we could go on forever and also not because of our energy.
But we will go on.
We will go on forever, definitely. Thank you so very much. Thank you all so very much for being with us online, now in person. Thanks to, again, to all the people who made it possible. And let's stay in touch and let's just bear and keep on discussing. With that being said, I would say, let's go to the bar.